It's my pleasure. I'm Mr. Neely, for those of you that don't know me. It's my pleasure to introduce this year's Holocaust Memorial speaker, Magda Brown, to students at Kennedy High School. Thank you. Magda is from Miskolc, Hungary, in 1944 when she was 17 years old, which is around your age. She was deported to the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz with her entire family. Magda's parents died in the gas chambers there. She was separated from her brother, who was put to work in the Hungarian military's Jewish labor force. Magda was transported to another part of Germany where she worked in a factory that produced bombs and rockets. In the final days of the Second World War's European theater, Magda was sent on a death march for 3 days. She was eventually liberated in a nearby forest by the 6th Armored Division of the U.S. Army. She eventually came to America and settled in Chicago. It would be great if Magda's story was a story like no other, but it's not. Millions of people died at the hands of the Nazis and their allies in and around World War II. Since then, millions others have died or lost their families to the forces of hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. She's here today to share her story, to remind our generations, mine and yours, of the need to watch out for the dangers of those forces. Kennedy High School, please again welcome Magda Brown.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So thanks to Smart Lunch. We will have Magda's presentation. If there are any questions afterwards for our whole group, if there's time, we ask the students come up front here so that they can have their questions relate to Magda, and then she can repeat that question and answer it. But during Smart Lunch A, students can go get their bags in fourth period and come back here and have a very small group, or maybe if a lot of you come, mid-sized group questions that Magda's happy to stick around and answer until about 12:20. All right, so thank you, Magda.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. As you heard, my name is Magda Brown. I was born and raised in Hungary and had a happy upbringing just like any of you. Matter of fact, I have one photo when I was close to your age, and the reason I show this picture to make you understand that I wasn't any different than any of you in the audience at that time. And I was a happy-go-lucky child. I did my homework. I didn't do my homework. You know, hung out with the kids. Did all those things that a teenager should do. So what happens when the pendulum swings and tragedy strikes? All of you have studied Second World War history already, so you are familiar with the onset of the Hitler era and his ultimate desire to create the perfect race, to have space and slaves. But above all this, he didn't like many, many people. He didn't like the homosexuals, the Russians, the gypsies, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and many political opponents, and he wanted to make slaves of those people. But his fervent desire was to eliminate the Jewish race, and he called it the final solution. So when he came to power in 1933, the military started preparing for an upcoming war, and there were 2 units of Nazi soldiers trained. The regular soldier, the gun-carrying soldier fighting a war. But then there was another group of Nazis who were trained to handle the final solution. And their job was exclusively to do just that. So how did it all work out? 1939, the war breaks out, and the Nazis are entering many Eastern European countries. So let's pick a country like Poland, which has a large population as well as a large Jewish population. So the special group of Nazis, who are called the Einsatzgruppe, their job was exclusively to go into the Jewish home, take the Jewish people out of their home into a ghetto, from a ghetto into a concentration camp, and thus the killing machine began. So I call the Holocaust the following. The Holocaust was a premeditated, scientifically coordinated mass murder. But remember, I told you that I was born in Hungary. Hungary is an ally of Germany. So the Nazis are staying out for the time being. This is 1939. So we Jews are certainly better off than our fellow Jews in Poland and the other Eastern European countries, because they are being killed one by one, and thousands of them. We are up to a point still sleeping in our own bed, up to a point we go to school or have businesses and so on. But don't entertain the idea that our life was super perfect. It was far from it. During the Hitler era in Germany, they created anti-Jewish laws, which was called the Nuremberg laws. And these laws were adopted by the Hungarian government. So now it was hitting us one by one by one. So I'm going to cite about 2 or 3 of them to give you an idea what they were. First, let me tell you about the military. Until about 1940, all young men of military age would enter the military. There was no discrimination. Matter of fact, my dear father was a dedicated soldier of the First World War. He was a proud Hungarian fighting for his country. However, in 1940, the government decides that the Jewish young man could no longer wear the country's uniform nor bear arms. However, he still had to enter the military. So about 1942, my brother was just about military age, so my parents had to outfit him with civilian clothing, just like when your kids go to overnighter, and he leaves home. Now he enters the military compound, but a separate division is set up for the Jewish boys, which is called the Jewish Labor Force. They are not the Hungarian soldier. They are the Jewish Labor Force. So not only are they wearing their private clothing, but on their arm they had to have an armband, further indicating that they are Jewish. And there were many other restrictions, where the regular soldier is permitted to go out on a leave to visit girlfriend, movies, or family, whatever the case may be. The Jewish boy had to have a very valid reason to exit the place. That's the only way they would get a pass, like somebody died in the family. I mean, some really serious reasons. These young Jewish boys were treated both physically and mentally the most abusive way by the Hungarian police. They were really beyond brutal. So, back to some other anti-Jewish laws. Professors, scientists, doctors, lawyers. For instance, the lawyers and the doctors were no longer permitted to enter their respective professional organizations. Then, one day, all these professionals got the pink slip. They're out of a job. Now, you have to think a little bit further here. Because there was no such a thing as a welfare system, so that professor may have had a family and children and perhaps elderly parents to support. And the Jewish community had to pool their resources to support thousands and thousands of these unemployed families. Then came another law, where if you had a larger property, they would take it away from you. You know, in America, thank God, we are used to transaction, attorneys, and legal exchange of property, etc. Zero. They took it away from you. A Jew could no longer own any larger properties. And in Hungary, there was another discrimination that took place as early as in the 1920s. And that was a law, in Latin it was called numerus clausus, which meant that only 1% of Jewish children were admitted into higher education. And that particular law hit me personally. I was getting ready to go to high school and preparatory to college courses, and my grades were good, and my father was able to pay for the tuition, but I didn't make the quota. Now, you know, when you are a teenager, you think of yourself, and you don't think of the political happenings and all the other tragedies. It is I, how come I didn't make it? And it hurts. So now, the reason I emphasize the variety of these anti-Jewish laws, to make you understand that genocide does not happen from one minute to the next. It builds gradually. First, they take away your property. They take away your livelihood. They reduce you to the lowest level of humanity. And it goes gradually, systematically. So all these things are hitting us, one after another. And a law is a law, to be obeyed. Now we are fast-forwarding time, and it is already 1944, and Hitler decides that the Hungarians are not doing enough with the final solution. So by March 1944, the Nazis walk into Hungary with the slightest resistance because the Hungarian government, police, and military welcome them. And the biggest tragedy here is that special group that I mentioned to you, the Einsatzgruppe, is led and directed by the worst killer of the 20th century, Adolf Eichmann. And with his expertise of doing all these final solution procedures, he comes into Hungary, and in 51 days, he and his group are able to negotiate the whole situation from home to the killing machine. So how does it all play out? The first thing we are told, once the Nazis are in, that everybody have to have this Jewish Star of David sewn onto their clothing, and without that, they are not permitted to go out on the street. And ironically, even tiny little children who really don't know what's going on had to wear this, otherwise they could not leave their home. Within another week, we get a new law, and that deals with all the Jewish people will be incarcerated and congregating in a ghetto. And here I give you a little English lesson. In America, we know the word ghetto, which means that an ethnic group decides to reside in a special community, but thank God they have total freedom to pick up and live somewhere else. In real life, a ghetto is something totally different. Visualize a state, okay? I mean, the Hungarian states are much smaller than Iowa or any of the US states, but regardless, so there is a state, all the different little counties, there would be families, like in a village would be like 10 Jewish families. But the order from Eichmann is a blueprint to every police station in the state. So these police stations very generously cooperate and help the Nazis carry out the dirty work. So now all these people are told that they have to pack a little overnight bag, and they have to line up on the street, and on foot they will be taken to the big city where the ghetto is located. So the Hungarian police had an umbrella group called the gendarme. These were the most brutal creatures on this earth, because I recognize the fact that the soldier have to obey his orders. When that soldier obeys his orders 200% more than what is expected of him, that is sheer brutality, and they exercise us to the fullest. So now from here, the people are brought into the big city, and one section of the big city is allocated to become the ghetto. I happened to be born and lived in a house that was in the designated ghetto area. So it was a well-furnished home, and we were, my parents, my brother and I, and an aunt and uncle. We were 6 people living in that comfortable home. So now this gendarme comes with a group of people, stops at my front of my house, looks in, and makes a decision and shoves a bunch of people in. You see, courtesy died. What if I had a grandmother who lived in the other area, would have liked to live at my house, or relatives, or some? Zero. They just shoved a bunch of people in. My home became the residency for 40 people. You cannot fathom what crowded conditions are. Matter of fact, before this moment, my parents knew that our house will become part of the ghetto, so they moved many of the heavy pieces of furniture into the yard. But even so, there was a little corner for these exhausted people with their little bag to just crouch down. And there were people of all personalities. There were the quiet ones, and the cursing ones, and the complainers, and the ones who were praying, crying, whatever you want, it was there. So now let me talk about myself. I was a spoiled brat. I was the youngest child in the family, and the little girl, I pretty much had what a teenager should have, which means that I had my own room, I had my own stuff. You see, girls and boys, this is where I learned how to share. Because there were some girls who were my size. I had a closet full of clothes and shoes and whatever a girl should have. Take whatever you want. And sharing became part of my life, and I am kind of proud of that. So, of the people in my house were a bit luckier than the others in other houses, because my father was in the meat market business, and in those days in Europe, they would smoke the meat because it does not require preservatives. So lots of the meat we had in our attic. So it supplemented some of the very meager rations we were receiving. There were many, many, many atrocities taking place within the ghetto. Now, once all the people were brought in, they were no longer out. You couldn't go to a doctor or nothing. So what happens, they closed off the entryway, and they had guards supervising no entries, except for one group of people, and I call them ghetto life. I call the legal robbery and the illegal robbery. So let's touch upon the illegal robbery. The Hungarian Nazi Party was comprised of a bunch of young, uneducated hoodlums. They were paid off by the Nazi Party to hurt the Jew, rob the Jew, kill the Jew, whatever their little heart desired. And they were quite obedient. So these young punks could enter the ghetto without any restrictions, walk into a well-furnished home, and take whatever they wanted. They would see a nice carpet on the floor, or a beautiful, expensive painting, or a silver tray, or something of value, and walk out with it. Now, I am not telling you this to feel sorry that, oh, they robbed us from that painting or whatever, because they rob us of everything anyhow. I want you to understand that until this time, the police protected me as well as any other Hungarian citizen. Now the police looks the other way. Number two, there comes the legal robbery. We are in the ghetto for maybe just a short time, 2-3 weeks or something, and an order comes from the government that they will send in some agents, and we have to turn over all our cash, jewelry, radios, other valuables. And you see, people had a little cash in the mattress, because by this time, our jobs were taken away like months before. So you didn't know whether that dollar, whatever money, will buy a crust of bread. So when we were too afraid not to obey. Now here again, I'm not emphasizing the valuable things that we lost. I want you to understand that the cash they took from us pays the Hungarian railroad worker to ship us to our death. Life in the ghetto finishes very rapidly, and by the end of May, we are given the order that we have to evacuate the ghetto, and we are going to be taken to another country because they need laborers for different farm work, factory work, or whatever. And here came the lie of the 20th century. The families will stay together. Now think about it. We have absolutely nothing left except a little 3-4 day supply in a little overnight bag. That's it. Once you walked out of your home, you never again see anything of it. So when they give you that psychological point that the families will stay together, so we think to ourselves, okay, the war must be getting to the end because this is already end of May. The Allies are pretty much ready to land at Normandy. The war has been going on for 5 years, so it will finish soon. Okay, we'll go and do our work wherever they need us. We'll come back and life will resume. Unfortunately, this is not a 007 movie, and it doesn't work out that way. So now they evacuated the ghetto, and in my particular town, there were 14,000 people in that enclosure. And now these many people have to walk through the town all the way to the other side of town, and they take us to a brickyard. And we couldn't understand, why are they taking us to a brickyard where there's absolutely nothing but bricks? It's an open field, there's no furniture, there's no toilet, there's no water, nothing. But, even that was scientifically figured out, because adjacent to the brickyard was the railroad track. And on my 17th birthday, they will put us into these boxcars that they will show. You see the boxcar? And the capacity of a boxcar holds maybe 35 people sitting crouched on the floor with their little baggage. They would put in as many as 75 to 85 human beings. It was so crowded that we were squashed together, just inching one way or another. In order to allow my parents to sit on the wooden floor, I stood for 3 solid days, shifting this way and that way. So once we are in this enclosure, they have placed 2 buckets in the corner. One bucket was for toilets, and the other bucket had water in it. Except that bucket of water was never, ever refilled for 3 days. You cannot imagine what thirst can do to your mind. You can be sick, you can be stressed, don't mean a thing. Your mind is only focusing on, if I could only have a sip of water. Your mouth is dry, your lips are parched, and you absolutely cannot think of anything else. The journey, again, like I described, the variety of people's behavior was similar in the boxcar as well. I vividly remember in the corner sat a young woman with a baby on her bosom. Unfortunately, that baby was already dead, but at least she died on her mother's breast. On the second day, as we were pushed this way and that way, I ended up by the little window, and I look out, and the train was crossing the division between Hungary and Czechoslovakia. It's a beautiful, lush Carpathian mountains. Now this is already June, and it's my birthday, because I will always remember my 17th birthday being locked up in the boxcar. And I look out the window, and in the distance I see a shepherd. And the shepherd is minding his field, and I look at him, and I think to myself, how come he's there and I'm here? I was a good girl, I haven't done anything bad. You see, the point here is that I could not imagine anyone walking freely on this earth. I thought that everybody was locked up in boxcars. The journey was treacherous, very slow. Sometimes they would put us to the back of railroad tracks because the military trains were using the lead areas. And sometimes people would put their arm out through the little window to beg for a cup of water, but nobody helped. There were no upstanders. So, on the 3rd day, we arrived to an unknown territory, which we find out later is Auschwitz. And Auschwitz is an unknown place as far as we knew, because they never told us where we're going to go. So they opened the boxcars, and some strange-looking men in striped uniform enter. They speak a different language, but somehow you understand. What they were motioning, get out of this boxcar, but leave your belongings on the floor. You will get it later. Later never comes. Because I found out later, after months after this happening, that older prisoners would enter the empty boxcars, empty all the belongings, put it into a special section, and they would go through every package piece by piece by piece. And if they would find any valuables in them, it would be shipped to the fatherland. So now we exit the boxcar. The men are ordered to go a different direction. That's the last time I see my father and any of the relatives, male relatives. And now there are lots of old women and children. Now here I give you a little math lesson. Depending on the size of the community where they would put the people into the boxcar, you see, to put 80 people into a boxcar and send them on a long trip, it would not be feasible. So, depending on the size of the community, they would couple together as many as 55 or even more of these boxcars. So when we arrived, there were a sea of people, several thousand people per transport. Matter of fact, after the war, I read statistics where it showed that Hungary exported 147 of these transports, equaling to 500,000 people. So now we are lined up, and my mother is holding on to me, and we're walking forward, and then all of a sudden we are faced by a group of Nazi officers, and their hands go up like this, which you understand, stop. You see, we are no longer human beings. We don't have a name. People don't talk to you. They just, like a robot, do this, this, this. One officer steps forward. He points a finger at you like this. So you understand you have to go that way. And my very, very young-looking 42-year-old mother, he saw us holding on to each other, and that was enough indication to send her that away, which I will explain what that away means. So now comes expedient happenings. One, from here they take us into an empty room. You have to disrobe totally and fold up your clothes, put it on the floor. You'll get it later. Later never comes. From here, we go into a room, and from the adjacent room, there are some strange-looking girls screaming from the top of their lungs, coming out. What has taken place behind those locked doors? They shaved your hair bald. Your body hair was shaven totally. And if that's not bad enough, they sprayed disinfectants on your freshly shaven skin. We looked unrecognizable. It took us hours to get to know one another in the beginning. We would look into each other's eyes and listen to the voice, and that would be an indication to recognize one another until we got accustomed to this appearance. From here came another phenomenon called the shower. Don't even imagine that it compared to anything of a shower that you took at your own home. This was nothing more than an empty room with about 50 shower heads screwed into the ceiling. And literally, a trickle of water was reaching your dirty, smelly body. There was no soap, no towel, no clean underwear. So with the damp body, we went to the next room, and it has a mountain of clothing, and some person threw a garment at you. They didn't even look at you. Are you tall, short, skinny, fat? Just anything. I ended up with a long slip. There was no underwear, no stockings, no shoes. They took the shoes away, and they gave us flip-flops that had wooden sole and a leather band to hold it onto the foot. It was the most difficult thing to get used to walking in it. Now, next procedure, sleeping time. Sleeping time in a totally empty room. There's nothing in it except wooden floor and windows. So, We have become a unit of 500 girls. And the 500 of us are put into this room, except the room would hold only 200. But they had it scientifically figured out if they lay us down like sardines in the can, then they can accommodate the 500 bodies. For the night, they put 2 buckets in the corner, and that was our toiletry. And to this day, I can't figure out why they would not allow us during the evening to go outdoors to the courtyard where they had the latrines. A latrine is nothing more than a giant hole dug in the ground, a wooden board across it, and it had some circle carved out for you to sit on. But for the night, we were not allowed to do that. The morning came at the crack of dawn. At 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, don't even think of what you and your mother taught you: brush your teeth, wash your face, change your clothes, the normalcy of life. As we were in that crumpled clothes, we were directed to go outdoors. Now, by this time, we have an older prisoner who have become our supervisor. And her job was to wake us up, get us out into the room, and now came the most tedious procedure that went on for hours and hours. And that was standing in line 5 abreast. And the supervisor girl would count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No high-tech stuff, just like this. Now, counting 500 people can take an hour. Then maybe she was off her count, another hour. Then would come a German soldier who was in charge of, above her, to recount us 5, 10, and so forth. So, meantime, we had to stand erect. In the crack of dawn, it is bitter cold. We are freezing. We are tired. We are hungry. But you still had to stand to be counted. And this insanity would go on 2, 3 times a day. So now we are wondering, why in heaven's name are they counting us? Now think about it. We are watched by Nazi women guards who have a police dog with them every couple of yards. We couldn't make a move without them seeing it. If that's not enough, there were a couple of yards apart watchtowers with a soldier aiming a machine gun at you. And if that's not enough, the entire camp was surrounded by electrified barbed wire fence. So how in heaven's name we could have escaped to, I don't have the answer. Food was, I won't even mention it because it was nothing more than a smelly green liquid with some unidentifiable stuff floating in it. Our daily calorie could have been anywhere from 300 to 400 a day, if we were lucky. So now there were many, many, many atrocities that took place at this location. But I will mention one more that came about a couple of days after we are at this area. There were some older prisoners in the area, and we asked them, could you tell us how soon we're going to see our relatives who went that away? And inevitably, they would point to the 5 chimneys. We were just viewing distance from us. And we have seen those 5 chimneys spewing out very heavy, dark black smoke, and it had an odor just like when you kill a chicken and you put it over flame to remove the feather, that kind of burning odor. But who had time to analyze what it is? So these older prisoners would say, that is where your parents are. We could not believe it. We came from a modern country. It is the 20th century. There's no such a thing as burning people alive. But unfortunately, that was the reality. So actually, us Hungarian Jews ended up in Birkenau, which is Auschwitz II. So when you see the entry to Auschwitz with the railroad tracks, what they have done, they leveled off in 1942 several Polish villages because the crematorium was already in that section. So to make it easier to put the bodies into the crematorium upon arrival, they built additional railroad tracks direct to the crematorium. So when we were separated, those other people would put back on the train, shipped to the crematorium, and that was their end. So then came what they called the selection, which meant that we had to go out in the courtyard. So let's take my unit of 500. We had to disrobe halfway, and I guarantee you they were not looking for our sexual beauty, but they were checking how strong our upper arm is, because they were looking for workers. So 1,000 of us Hungarian Jewish women were selected to be shipped out of Auschwitz, and we ended up in an ammunition factory in Germany that manufactured rockets and bombs. Our job was to fill dangerous, poisonous liquid material through a pipe system into the bomb, fill it fully, lock it, and then 2 people had to put it to a warehouse location. It was a 12-hour shift, 1 week daytime, 1 week nighttime. We are into doing this heavy, heavy labor a couple of months, and we look at each other, and now our hair started growing out to crew-cut size, but if your hair was black, now it's orange, your face is lemon yellow, and your lips are deep dark purple. Working with this highly poisonous material without any protective garment started invading our body. But thank God, the end was nearing. So at the end of March of 1945, the leader of the camp received an order from German headquarters that they have to evacuate the camp, and they put us on the death march. We had the uniform, and we had a thin spring coat, no legging. They put us on an open highway, bitter cold march, raining, a cold as can be. That's why I never want to be cold, hungry, or thirsty again. So we were marching on this open highway. Some of our colleagues were getting ill, but we had to protect them. And then for the night, we slept in the wet ground in the ditches. And on the 3rd day, we arrived to a farm area, and we have noticed that there weren't as many guards with us as when we started. So now we notice a field of a wheat field or whatever field, and a group of us are standing there, and you see we lived in faith and fantasy. So we start fantasizing. How would it be if during the night we crawl on our stomach and in about 3 block distance we saw a barn? How would it be if we get there and hide there? You see, the important thing here is that we have totally lost our self-esteem. So what? They find us, they kill us, it will be all over. But thank God we were saved, because hiding in the barn, the next day, 2 young men in a strange uniform were approaching us, which turned out to be 2 GIs from the 6th Armored Division of the U.S. Army, God bless them all, and they were our liberators. So in closing, I want to leave you with 3 remarks. One is, you are our future. Protect your freedom as strongly as you humanly can, because slavery is terrible. And you have the opportunity, we are living in a free country, make sure to preserve that. Second, I want you to think very, very hard. Why do we hate? Because all problems stem from hatred. I am not telling you to hate or not to hate. That is entirely up to your conscience. But at least give it some thought why. And thirdly, every so often, there are some people who deny the existence of the crematoriums. Unfortunately, they were very true. And you know what bothers me about this? In today's high-tech world, when you just push a button and any historical documents, original photos is at your eye view. But there's still some who say the crematorium didn't exist, that it's just a figment of imagination. So, in case you doubt what I am telling you, we had a wonderful General Eisenhower who fought in the Second World War in Germany with his soldiers, and he liberated a very sad sight, one of the concentration camps where we saw thousands of dead bodies and emaciated bodies and zombies walking around. He summoned his soldiers and he said, "Take as many photographs as you can, because the world will not believe this. So I make it a point to read his quotation, what he has said. I have never felt able to describe my emotional reaction when I first came face to face with indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency. I visited every nook and cranny of the camp because I felt it my duty to be in a position from then on to testify at first hand about these things in case there ever grew up at home the belief or assumption that the stories of Nazi brutality were just propaganda. And there's just one more, and this is from Maya Angelou, and her remarks about freedom. Quote, "Freedom is a fragile thing and is never more than one generation away from extinction. They must be fought for and defended every day." So thank you for listening. If we have a few more minutes, if anybody has a question for expediency, please just walk up here. I can answer if I can, and then I will be still in the time frame. So who is the first brave one? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. There's somebody coming. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh my goodness, you don't have to do that. Thank you. So, who is the first brave one? Do we have a brave one? We don't have any brave ones. Okay, well, if you don't have any brave ones, I know you have to run, but I want to share with you one more thing about my brother. I remember I told you that he was in the Jewish labor force, so we did not hear about him. So what has happened? After the war, we are recuperating in Germany the summer of 1945, and two young Hungarian men are approaching the area looking for some relatives because there were 1,000 women scattered all over. And one of the young men happened to be the childhood friend of my brother. So I asked him, "Have you seen Michael?" He said, "Yes, I saw him in Budapest, the capital of Hungary, in Christmas of 1944. Now, to me, that was an unheard phenomenon. I thought they have moved all the Jewish people out of Hungary. But what has happened? All the outlying areas were taken out, and then at the early July, Roosevelt and Churchill intervened with the Hungarian government to say, stop the deportation, because they were going to take the Jewish people out of Budapest as the last crescendo. They needed all the gendarmes, helper from the outlying areas. So that was stopped, but I don't know this. So I kind of doubted the boy's word. How could he be there? But nevertheless, through very, very, very difficult channels, I managed to get back to Hungary in a couple of months. And I go into my hometown. I go up to the Jewish agency inquiring. Answer: to the best of our knowledge, your brother is alive. The bad news is he's in Russian prison. So I couldn't figure out, how could he be in Russian prison? This is already the fall of 1945, the Japanese war, everything is over. So in the meantime, I received 2 entry visas to the United States from my relatives, one for him, one for me. And now I'm in a quandary. This is winter. I am mooching on my cousins who had a place to put me up because I went back to my home and the people would not give me the privilege of even sleeping there temporarily. They said the government gave them the apartment, whatever. So I am waiting through a couple of months and I hear absolutely nothing from my brother. So I have to make an executive decision all by myself. Do I wait here until he comes? I have no news about him. At the same time, I could get out and find a better life. So I chose the one. I left his papers with the relatives. I took off. I managed to get back to Germany, and I ended up in the US in September of 46. Not until 1948 did I ever hear from him. What has taken place? The Hungarian army was trying to get out of the country because they were afraid of the Russians. So they have taken their Jewish labor force group, crossed the border into Austria and Germany, dumped the Jewish boys in different concentration camps, and they were free men. My brother's unit could not negotiate this trip because the borders were unavailable, and now he is liberated by the Russian soldiers in the January of 1945. So as a free man, he goes out on the street, and the Russian soldier arrests him. And he tries to explain who he is, what. They didn't care. So you see, the Russians lost 20 million people during the Second World War, and they needed manpower desperately. So they picked up all able-bodied men, whether that was a Jew, a Nazi, or a Hungarian soldier. They didn't care. Now the bad guys and the good guys end up in Siberia in a paper mill factory. And during the summer, my brother's job is to go out into the swamps, cut down trees, gets bit by a mosquito, develops malaria, and still for another 3 years, he is still in prison. So finally, by the time he comes back to Hungary in 1948, he's emotionally and physically a very sick man. And we had a Catholic nanny who took him in and literally nursed him back to health. It has taken me until 1962 to reunite. So thank you for listening to this part, because it's not a unique story.